Hello. We are live and I'm plugging in my phone because I don't want it to die. So if it does, bear with me. For now, it's not plugged in. We should be good. Let's join Eli Nash into the live. Thanks for everyone who's joined so far. We'll wait for, oh, there he is. Okay. We'll wait for a few more people to join, and then we'll get started. Can you guys hear me? Hey, welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Oh, I'm glad I can hear you. Can everybody hear us? This is always the hardest part. I'm never sure. You can hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Okay, I can hear you. Rebecca's waving. I guess that's a good sign. Right, Rebecca? Yes, okay. Great. So we have a few people on. I'm wondering if we should wait for a few more people. Maybe we could just kind of get started by, let's see. All right, I guess I'll just start by saying that, well, thanks for coming on tonight. I'm really excited to hear from you, and I think we all are. And I just wanted to remind those of you who are on already and anybody who watches this in the next 24 hours or in the future, that whatever we talk about today, neither of us are claiming to be rabbis or psychologists, and really, we're not coming at it from a mental health background perspective. Eli agreed to come on to share his personal journey as he experienced it with all of you and me and on this platform, so that, and kind of share how he has been empowered by his own story and use that to grow as a person and to empower other people. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding of what we're talking about. And I just want to make that clear before we start. What do you
Everything you said is true, except I'm a rabbi, but.
Oh, all right. Well, he's a rabbi too.
I don't speak as one, but I have the document somewhere signed.
There we go. Even better. So what I want to do is just kind of give the floor over to you. And now that you're a rabbi, even more credentials. And kind of, we all want to hear from you. And I'm actually going to turn off the comments while you speak, and then I'll turn them back on. So as he speaks, if anyone has any questions, make sure to remember to ask them at the end, because you feel comfortable answering questions afterwards, right?
I actually prefer answering questions, and I thought you were going to ask me questions, which I was going to answer.
Okay, sure, we could do that.
Yeah.
We could do that. I actually didn't send you them beforehand, but I guess we could kind of.
That's
have
fine.
more
I don't
of a
need them beforehand.
What's that?
If it's true, I don't need them beforehand. If it's true, it's the same answer.
I might need them beforehand. I'm not so good at talking on the spot, but I'll do my best. Okay, well then, why don't you start by just kind of introducing yourself and just introduce yourself.
My name is Eli Nash. Presently, I am the founder of Jeg & Sons, which is a cell phone distribution company. Been running that since 2006. And about 8 months ago, I started Mic Drop, which possibly some of you have heard of, which aims to bring the power of storytelling to the world.
Okay.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, great. So I actually found Mic Drop. I was kind of exploring Instagram accounts that were empowering other people, and I came across Mic Drop and noticed that it was very in line with our mission of, using, I guess, like people's own stories to empower other people. And I guess I kind of want to learn for myself, and I think other people can learn from it too, where your head was at when you started Mic Drop, and kind of your journey with that and what kind of impact you've seen it have.
Yeah, so there are a couple different components to Mic Drop. One is the personal, like what it did for me, and what I've seen it, the power that I've seen it has. So in terms of me, I had a painful fear of public speaking. 5 or 6 years ago, I couldn't imagine doing what I'm doing right now, and many other things that I've done. And once I got past that, said, everything you want is on the other side of fear. Once I got past that, I found a lot that I really enjoyed. And once, it's like having a piece of cake that you like. You tell your friends, hey, this is a good piece of cake. So that's certainly one aspect of it. The other is, as far as mental health is concerned, I don't have much to share on most aspects of mental health outside of addiction. And within addiction, the most powerful one that has kind of been tested by time and has been able to help people. I know they have a lot of different therapies that people promote today, but if you just look at the power of the 12 steps and the way it's helped a lot of people, I certainly don't speak for the 12 steps. I don't speak for any specific group, but one of the differences in the 12 steps, if you look at the way it started, is it started with one addict sharing their story with another addict. And suddenly they were able to relate to it and get help from it. And it wasn't preaching religion, and it wasn't preaching, one addict wasn't preaching religion, it wasn't preaching God or the gospel or therapy. They were just sharing their own journey, and someone else was able to see themselves in there. So through that, I just saw the power of stories, and it's a way that really helped me, hearing other people's stories. So I started Mic Drop as a way to bring more of these stories out into the world and give people that ability to speak. I think that the world has a way of bullying us out of our voice, and you see it at a very young age in many different ways. I saw it this is a small example of it, but my niece had my first cousin had a son, and the day of the bris, the baby was crying, right, which is that expression in the moment, and the mother was rocking the child, saying, "Shh, big boys don't cry, big boys don't cry." So first of all, it's not true. I'm big and I cry all the time. But first of all, it's not true. Second of all, he's not a big boy. Third of all, this was the way he's expressing himself, and you're shutting him up. And I think that the world has a way of bullying us into silence, and it bullied me into silence for a long time. But there was a little spark inside me that wouldn't be silenced, and eventually other people ignited it for me. And here I am speaking. And now I want to be that for others. If someone else was bullied into silence, please reach out, and we'll nurture that back into existence and show that voice can be a real power in the world.
Yeah, okay, that's great. I keep having questions that come up as you speak, but I'm wondering if anybody else has questions that come up, we can also address those. Is that okay? We address anyone's questions? Because I don't want to forget.
Any questions is good.
Okay,
yeah,
anyone who has questions as he speaks, go ahead and ask them. We'll address them in order. And in the meantime, I'll just go according to my mind. But obviously I'm going to forget what you just said. I was thinking when you were talking about, being bullied into not wanting to speak and all that, what was the kind of kicker? Oh, well, I guess you said it already, but like the kicker that kind of like flipped it to like a 180 turn, and then kind of how did that journey look like for you that made you not want to give up?
Specifically speaking?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess you kind of told the story. So it was really the kicker with that the mom that shushed the baby.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, that wasn't a kicker. That's just an example I gave of the way the world bullies them into silence. So here was an 8-year-old boy, which was being bullied into silence completely unconsciously by the parents, and that just continues later on when they're forced to sit through 8 hours of school in a way that's completely unnatural. And if they're too boisterous, they're sent to the principal's office. All of these things that just bully us into silence.
Got it. Did you have a specific one for yourself that like just made you kind of open your eyes to something, or it just was the way your life worked out?
So there was something specifically that I wanted to talk about. So, I saw things that I thought I can weigh in on, and I was doing it in a lot of one-on-one conversations, and specifically I was talking about child sex abuse. Some people who know me know of my work with Jewish Community Watch, and I was a very vocal advocate of Jewish Community Watch for a while. So the turning point happened after I got involved with Jewish Community Watch. So Jewish Community Watch helped me confront my own abuser, and I've shared the story on multiple occasions, and I'm more than happy if someone has specific questions sharing that now. But I was on a 5-year journey from the moment I entered therapy at 23 years old until about 5 years later when I met the person who abused me. And I was on a 5-year journey to make that meeting happen. And there were certain requests that I had from him that within that meeting as well. And after that, I wanted to share my story. And what I wanted to share mostly was A, that abuse happens to a lot of people in the community. B, people who try to fight back are silenced. And I saw the way that I was pushed back, and I'm not completely in the community today. Right? My yarmulke's inside my head, not on my head. Right? I'm not completely inside the community today. And nevertheless, I was pushed. And I just knew that for other people, it was even worse. So I wanted to speak out. I wanted to speak out about child sex abuse, the way that it's happening. It's happening to a lot of people. It's happening to a lot of people who you wouldn't imagine they're living relatively normal lives, but they're suffering with this inside them. And I Also wanted to speak in support of Jewish Community Watch. So eventually, through that, there was this very strong desire to make something happen. And sometimes when there's a very strong desire to make something happen, and then afterwards we vocalize the desire. And I'll get to that question about what if someone denies it in a second. After I vocalize the desire, then someone popped into my life. His name was Rosh Lowe, and he trained me to speak. And then after that, I gave his name to many other people and to many other businesses for him to train them to speak. And once I saw how effective that was, then we started a business. That was kind of my personal journey of finding my voice. Should I take this question of what happens?
Go ahead. Yeah, that's a good question to be addressed. So I'll read it. What happens when you do confront your abuser, but he totally denies it? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my abuser, he started by minimizing it, and then he went to denying it. So first he said it wasn't that bad, and then he said it wasn't sexual. But I mean, what happens? So he says his piece, and I say my piece. I need more than that. And I'm not looking for him to acknowledge it to me. I know what happened. So is there another question following that?
I'll have a question following that. How do you trust your own confidence when other voices are telling you things that are against what you believe? And how can you be so sure of yourself when there's so many people who seem to be maybe telling you that whatever you're thinking isn't right, or, along those lines, in this context and just in general?
So that was my question, meaning what happens if I confront him and he totally denies it? So he kind of denied it in my situation. He didn't deny that there was something. He just denied that it was sexual. Mm-hmm. In my case, I kept pushing forward. I knew it was true. I guess that's a different question. If someone's doubting themselves, I don't know that I'm the person to answer that question.
You never
if
doubted
someone's
yourself?
Doubting themselves. Did I ever doubt myself? There were times that I doubted certain memories related to it, and I could tell you that, first of all, I had Jewish Community Watch behind me, so that made him a lot more willing to sit down and listen to me. Prior to having JCW behind me, and he had that fear of JCW, I would say that it was a little bit more difficult, because if he denied it, then so I had JCW believing me, which was
so
really
that kind
nice.
of does answer my question. Is when I say trusting your own confidence as it relates to this, and just in general, if you do have something that's powerful behind you that you trust, then it's almost like a pillar that holds you up. So in your case, your pillar was this JCW platform, right? Does that make sense? We see another question.
In a lot of ways, yeah. Or the mayor specifically at JCW gave me a lot of confidence. And then when I sat down with the guy, what I said to him was this. I said that I'm going to repeat a bunch of memories of our time together. And if one of them is wrong, then I'll walk out and say I made up all of them. And I told him the color of the sheets in his room. I described the setup in his room. I did the kind of lock, the kind of door handle, a bunch of other things related to his room, specific baseball cards and basketball cards that he had showed me to pull me into coming to the room. So through those, as I shared more and more, he eventually broke down crying. So I guess the question is, what if someone doesn't have that same experience? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I just share from my experience.
Right. Yeah. For sure. So, there were other questions I didn't see. Person doesn't doubt themselves. Well, what if the person doesn't doubt themselves? They know it's completely true.
Call JCW. In regards to, Coach Meish asked the question here, is there any specific therapy that you worked that was most effective, and what was the biggest breakthrough in your healing? The biggest breakthrough in the healing was wanting to be healed. There's a part that I noticed afterwards that I was really holding on to the story, that it gave me an excuse in some way to not show up the way I wanted to by saying, oh, this happened to me. And just a willingness to say, you know what, I'm tired of this. I don't need the story. I don't need the excuse. I don't need anything. I just want to show up powerfully. And whatever this is and however it held me back, I'm determined to get over it. I tried a little bit of everything. So it's hard for me to say what worked specifically, because when you're doing everything, when I say everything, I was doing a lot. Mm-hmm. So I tried EMDR. I did a lot of EMDR. I found that helpful. I tried crystal therapy too. I had some woman in Israel who crushes up crystals and you drink it every day and she claims to help. I did acupuncture. I did cognitive therapy. I did
Mm-hmm.
12 steps. There's nothing like talking to someone who went through the experience and hearing from them. That's for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Nothing like that.
Okay. I'm actually taking notes of questions as you speak so I don't forget, just in case other people don't have. I'll just kind of gear it towards my thoughts. But if you want to just look at the last couple of
I see
questions.
someone said, what does JCW do? JCW stands for Jewish Community Watch, and it combats child sex abuse in the Orthodox communities in a lot of ways. So it exposes people who they think need to be exposed, because there are often people who are repeat offenders. So it exposes those. It does its best to hold people accountable and gives a lot of support to victims. So very often when victims have fought back against the system or fought back against their abuser, they were bullied and intimidated within the community. So whether it's showing up to court with them or walking them into the police station, JCW does a lot for people.
Okay, thank you for sharing that information. So, all right, I guess that was the last question that we had so far. So I heard you say on the last question that you answered, you said the words, the moment I entered therapy. So I guess to me, I'm curious how you got to that stage, even in the first place, to know that, you know, you couldn't handle this on your own and you needed the therapy. I mean, what was that thought process like for you?
It was actually a business decision in my case. So in a lot of ways, I saw money as my ticket out. And if I was able to make money, then that was going to solve all my problems. And I started running into problems in business, specifically related to loaning people money or giving people credit terms that they didn't end up, you know, paying back and things like that. And in a conversation with a fellow business associate, he said, hey, you may want to go to a therapist because there's something about this that doesn't feel right. Later, he told me that he thought I was abused, but didn't want to bring it up to me. But he as
How
well
would
was
he
sexually
know?
abused.
How did he have that
Well,
insight?
he was sexually abused and he had some of the same stuff.
Okay.
So later he told me that, but in that moment, he was sharing it just from a place of, I think it would be good for you to speak to this guy who happens to be a therapist and he does a lot of work in companies. So I walked in almost from a business standpoint, not expecting the whole journey that it ended up taking.
Okay, yeah. So I guess from your experience, there was no question of like the stigma that was stopping you. It was just like, this is what I got to do to move forward in my work, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there. Am I
Oh, no, sure, there
understanding?
was a there was a stigma. I parked a couple blocks away and I didn't tell anyone that I was going to therapy. Of course, there was that
Yeah.
stigma, but it didn't stop me from doing it, no.
Okay. Well, at what point did you just decide to be okay with not parking a couple blocks away, and even getting to this point where when I approached you to ask you to come on here, you like didn't even hesitate? I mean, what got you to there?
Because once you start talking, right, and we didn't, we'll start talking soon. I know talking about JCW in the last little bit, I've been talking about porn addiction and my journey through and recovering from porn addiction. And for example, there's so many things that I've held close to the vest and saying I can't share it. And all of a sudden I do, or someone else does first. And I was like, oh, me too. So in my experience, pretty much everything I've ever said that was really difficult for me to share, I've got a lot of, this word has other connotations now, but I got a lot of, hey, me too. Like I have that same experience or that same struggle. So I stopped thinking about it too much. I still do over new things. But once I get to that point, say, you know what, let me share this as well. I usually get a lot of, hey, that's been my experience too. And anyone who's done the work I'm doing, just speaking out about things, gets a lot of private messages from people. And those private messages, they're huge because that's what keeps us going and saying, okay, we're moving things in the right direction.
Okay, I actually had a thought while you were just talking. When you did start to share, I don't know for sure, but would you say that you were sharing about closed wounds, things that you had already somehow processed, or like that's how you were able to be vulnerable?
No, if you see some of my first talks, no, there was a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion. Actually
But
shared.
you had to be okay with embracing that emotion. I mean, maybe you seem like a confident person. Is that why? I mean, because you're confident? I mean, I think a lot of people don't have that, what you have, that just like...
No, you're seeing the finished product. Now, I wouldn't call myself a finished product, but you're seeing the finished product, whatever that means.
That's
And
a
you're
really
judging
good
it based.
phrase.
and you're judging it based on what you're seeing today. The very first time I shared my story, I shared in Miami Beach at the Jewish Learning Center on 41st Street, and I was shaking. And most of it, I was sobbing through. There were some people who may be listening in who were at that talk, and it was a very, very difficult talk to give. And last week I gave a talk, and it was the very first time I spoke in public about porn addiction and some of that struggle, and I got emotional too. So no, I don't see it as, oh, the wounds are healed, now I talk about it. I've healed the wounds by talking about it.
Wow.
And here we have someone who was actually at the first talk, very powerful first talk, and perhaps I wasn't like this and didn't talk about these subjects at that time. I was extremely emotional. It was very difficult to get through, and I had the vulnerability hangover for, 3, 4, 5 days afterwards.
Wow. Okay. That's so interesting that you say that talking about it was part of your process. I mean, I'm just wondering, in a world that someone opens up, and let's say someone who's watching this has something that they feel like they need to get through. I mean, and I'm saying this just kind of to protect people, just in case they think that your path is their path. Because I think that happens sometimes on social media. If someone's watching this and they see, oh wow, that's the healing process, that's what I need to do, I'm just gonna tell the world my problems and I'll get better. I mean, I'm assuming there's something that you had that, I don't know how to phrase this properly, but maybe it was the therapy that helped you be okay with after dealing with it, or maybe it was your own mind, but you had to kind of process it after you spoke about it out loud, right?
Well, I wasn't getting up to speak just to speak. I was getting up to speak to share a very specific message.
Okay.
So there was a purpose to my talk. It wasn't just to talk about my problems out loud. Not at all. It was to talk about the solution
behind it
out loud. I wanted to speak. I wanted to share a message, and that's
right.
where I was coming from. And then the uncomfortable feelings or the fear or everything else kind of was secondary to the purpose that I was speaking. I was speaking with a very specific message, and the message was that child sex abuse destroys people for years and years and years, and the effects are real. And I felt like the world needed to hear this. So I wasn't getting up to tell the world that I was abused. I could have just put a Facebook post and said I was abused or something like that. And I did some of those. I mean, before I spoke publicly, I did do a documentary, 6 survivors, Orthodox survivors of sexual abuse, and I spoke on that. So I did in some way announce it to the world in that way. But when I got up and spoke and kind of gave people a window into me, that was with a very specific purpose, and the purpose was to help others. And it's the only reason I talk now, is because I feel that by doing so, I've experienced it, that by doing so, others are helped.
Okay, I love that. I think we had a few questions or comments that we should probably back up on before I ask you mine. Let's see, what were we up to? Do you know what we were up to?
So Blossoms F, I kind of feel like this is just a little bit of a sidebar conversation.
Yeah, maybe message him privately at JCW.
Going down a specific path. I'd be more than happy to address some of these in a private conversation as much as I could, but it kind of feels like 4 or 5 questions down the path that are very specific versus more general, which I prefer to stay to over here. Coach Mike said, how does someone know if the behavior is addictive? What made you realize you were addicted? Have a reason to stop, try to stop, see you can't by yourself. And that's what it was like for me. So in terms of porn specifically, I did not know for years I was addicted because I did it, I enjoyed it, and I saw no reason to stop it. Eventually I wanted to stop it. And when I tried, I just saw how difficult it was. And I was like, hey, I might be addicted.
So you have to have somewhat of a very high level of emotional intelligence to be able to have those insights about yourself.
Not really, no.
Really?
No, if you have you watch porn and afterwards you feel really bad about it, right? So, or I watch porn, I feel really bad about it. So now there's no insights. I just feel really bad. And the last thing I did was watch porn. So I know that was connected to it. And the next day I say, I'm never going to do this again. And for most of the next day I don't. And then this thought starts playing in my head. It's like, oh, what about this one? What about that? What about doing this? What about doing that? And then I go watch it. I'm like, wow, I promised myself I wouldn't. Okay, this is going to be the last time. So you do that a few times, and then you try different creative ways of stopping. And one creative way will be, okay, I won't use my laptop at home. I'll only do it at the office. And at the office, there's some sort of monitoring system. And then that doesn't work because you say, screw the monitoring system. What's the difference? And one trick after another that's failed, you start saying, okay, I got a problem here.
So when it doesn't even take the emotional intelligence, it's just when you realize it's a problem and you're not functioning in the way that you expect of yourself. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, the only thing that I think I do better than others sometimes, which I know you keep wanting to try to put me in like a little bit of a class of my own, is that I listen to advice a little bit better. So when I go, for example, if I go to a therapist and I ask him what to do, I'm likely to listen to his suggestion versus debating with him. Otherwise, I wouldn't go in the first place. So a lot of the debate takes place, and it's not that I'm not critical, and it's not that I'm not skeptical, but a lot of that takes place before. And then when someone gives me advice, I'll try it and just say, okay, look, my way wasn't working. That's the only thing that I found that I do. Like, I was like, oh, that's a good attribute. When I ask someone for advice, I actually listen. And I see a lot of people don't do that.
Right. Okay. That sounds like an attribute of humility. I don't know if I'm describing it right, but a person who's able to accept what other people tell them as real and able to put their ego aside, I think that's and I'm not speaking for you, I'm speaking for other people who might be listening, who might want to use your story in a way that they can relate. I think maybe just learning that sometimes it's okay to trust other people more than you trust yourself if you're questioning your actions. I don't know, just a thought.
Maybe, listen, whatever it is, it's certainly something that I've noticed to myself, that I'm appreciative that I have that. Like, whatever that is, call it humility or call it, I think, common sense, but whatever we call it, I'm happy that I have that. And it's something that I often see others struggle with, where they ask someone for advice and they get it and then they debate it. So that's, someone asked, have I faced any judgment or lashon hara for your wounds and your sharing of them? And if so, how do you manage the judgmental stuff? So the answer is yes. Even within my own family, some of them questioned why I'm doing this. I had a sister who shared with me a couple of weeks ago that when I first started speaking about the abuse, she went to a friend of hers and said, I don't know why my brother's speaking about this. He's dragging down the whole family. He's going to hurt our shidduch possibilities or whatever else she was worried about. And for me, I knew why I was doing it. And all I need is that one person to reach out to me and say they've been helped. And the rest just doesn't matter that much at this point. And I think it was the same then. I just, the more I spoke, I heard from a couple of people that it helped. So what if a few people are insulted? I know where I was. I don't speak to anyone else really. I speak to help others. I say that, but I speak to help people who were like me. So I'm wondering, okay, when I was 8 years old, what did I need to hear? When I was 15 years old, what did I need to hear? When I was 20-something, what did I need to hear? And I would have killed to hear something like this. Like when I was 18 years old, if I was like scrolling through Instagram and I popped into something like this and someone was talking about abuse and addiction and stuff like that. So I speak to that. And then the fact that someone else may be offended, I think exactly in those terms. Let's say someone really helped me and they told me afterwards, like, oh, by the way, when I spoke, some people were offended. I would say you shouldn't take it too serious because it was really... it was really meaningful to me. So I just put that hat on. I don't get too caught up usually in the judgment. I think about them strongly before. I don't make knee-jerk decisions. I spend a long time going back and forth and deliberating whether or not I want to speak about porn addiction. And I made the decision that I'm going to speak about porn addiction. And then I said, okay, so once I do, then I'm going to speak to my wife and say, this is what I'd like to talk about. What do you think? And she gives me her input, and I call a rabbi who I respect and says, okay, if I speak about porn addiction publicly, and he says, yes, just say that the reason you're doing it is to help others. It's not to parade on stage that you're a porn addict, but simply to just say that specifically in every one of your talks. So I try to do it in the right way. I don't disregard everyone just because I make a decision, but once I make a decision, I'm likely not to pay too much attention to the criticism if it comes.
So, okay, I know you said that it sounds like I'm putting you in a box, and I'm sure you understand why it sounds like that, but I just want to explain that to everybody. For who's ever watching, he's saying his story, and I'm just trying to kind of, as we go along, give anyone who's watching a way to, if they don't relate, if whoever you are, if you don't relate to him exactly, I mean, the point isn't for you to try to be him or, think that you are just because you went through something similar to him, now you need to, like, those kinds of things. The point is really to own your story. So that's kind of like, I just want to make sure that that's very clear. And I know you're doing a good job of it. I just in case, I don't know. But anyway, so what I'm hearing from what you're saying is that, like, the idea of thinking things through is very important, and being able to ask other people for advice and knowing your intentions when you're doing things. That's what I took out of.
Yeah, I'll also discuss it, right? I'm not getting up on the stage the first time I decide to share something.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an impulsive decision at all. I discuss it with others. I practice a speech in front of a couple people. Right, so by the time I'm on the stage, yes, it's a lot tougher in front of 200 people. It's a lot tougher when I know it's going to be recorded. There's a lot more at stake, but I've already thought about it and kind of tweaked it. And the other is, I don't take advice from people that are, I didn't ask my parents whether or not they think I should share my story. I let them know that when I got home from filming the documentary that I did, 6 Survivors of Abuse Speak Out, I let my parents know that, hey, I did this documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said that I really felt like I needed to do it. And that's all. It's not, you know, I'll try to be as sensitive to them as possible, but I also know that I have to share my story, and I get to share my story.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not total disregard, and I'll listen to what people have to say, and sometimes I'll calibrate my next speech based on feedback from the previous one. But by the time I've made a decision, I've made a decision. Someone's asked, were you more readily available to take advice because you had nothing left to lose? Yes and no. There were times where that was the feeling when I took advice, and I was more ready to take difficult advice and make those kind of decisions. But it's just, typically when I call someone and ask for advice, by that point in time, I'm comfortable taking their advice and I'm willing to give it a shot. I'm not asking someone random on the street for advice. If I'm going to a therapist who deals with this every single day and has been able to help a lot of people through abuse, I'm taking their advice. I'm taking someone who's been working on this for 20, 25 years. I'm not flipping a coin to see whose advice to take. So the same is true of business advice. If I call someone, I'm struggling through an issue, yeah, I want to understand it. I want to clarify it. But, you know, I often say that Nasa Vinishma is a very useful approach when it comes to healing as well. That, you know, the Nasa Vinishma means that any listening that we're doing is just for clarification to understand how to do what we want to do. But the commitment to healing has to come from that place, that I have an absolute rock solid commitment to healing, no matter what I have to do in order to get there. And then the nishma that comes afterwards is simply, I'm listening in order to understand what action I need to take to do it appropriately, not this idea of, but what if it doesn't make sense? You know, we don't understand why Tylenol gets rid of a headache, but we don't debate it for hours on ends. We just take the frickin' Tylenol and then we feel better. And if we don't, then we go back to the doctor and I have to say, it might be something much more. So why don't you try this? Or why don't we do this test? But there are people who are experts at getting rid of headaches and they've studied it for a long time. So if I'm at the point where I have a headache and I call someone and say, what should I do for this headache? I'm likely to take their advice.
$1 million thought.
Someone asked, how do you deal with the unsupportive people? You know, most unsupportive people, maybe it's my own fantasy, but I just think they're dealing with their own struggle. I can't tell you how many people have criticized me, and then afterwards I found out that they were abused or they were dealing with their own journey that they weren't ready to uncover yet. So I try not to take it personal. It obviously depends on, you know, the specific situation. If someone has a specific one, I'd be more than happy to address that one. If they know of a negative thing that I got, I can talk about that one. But in general, with unsupportive people, I see it as their own journey, and I see it likely as they're not ready to deal with their issues yet, so they're telling me not to deal with mine.
Yeah.
And not in a judgmental way.
What's that?
And not in a judgmental way.
Oh, yeah. And I actually want to comment on that one too, because this is, I was actually happy to see that question because it's something that Rebecca and I have been putting a lot of thought into lately at like what, just on a side note and kind of a more broad perspective, with the whole like movement in general to kind of like try to empower people to own their stories and empower people to just be real with themselves. And, break stigma pretty much of mental illness and mental health. We've really faced a lot of pushback and a lot of unsupportive people, and even people who are close to us. And that's a journey that we've been working through also in our own way. And I think everybody who's ever doing something that's controversial in any way is going to face pushback. And I think what you said it exactly how it is. If you can recognize, if you know your intentions and you know that what you're doing is right, then what other people say just doesn't matter, because it doesn't fit into your picture of what's right. So it has to come from a place that's not your problem, and you have to recognize what is your problem versus what might be someone else's problem. And to me, that's been the most empowering message that Rebecca and I have worked through what our process so far.
There's also what's up for negotiation, what's not open for negotiation. So for example, I'm not opposed to hearing people's feedback. By all means, give me feedback, and if there's a way that I can share my story better and more effectively, and there's some things that don't work, by all means, I'll listen to that. But there's certain things that are not negotiable, and that's that I'm going to share my story. That's mine, and I have the right to, and I will continue to. So it's not from a place of I know best, and it doesn't matter what feedback I get. Sometimes in the criticism, there's really valuable feedback if we pay attention to it clearly enough and don't get too defensive around it. But at the same time, there are certain things that there's no one's going to tell me to shut up again. That one has come and gone. But there's certainly feedback that someone can give, and I know why I'm doing things, and you know why you're doing things, and I'm sure you're getting messages from people who said, I took the first journey. You can do this whole stuff for a year, and one person check them.
It froze for me. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that's fine. And one person can check themselves into rehab as a result of what you're doing, and it's worth it for them. So all of the criticism and all the noise and what people have to say about it, how do you take away from that one amazing experience that someone got? And I've had those already. So I have those messages.
Yeah. I hear that one. All right. What was the next question?
Coach Mike asked, is there a lesson we can learn from you saying your kippa's in your head? I have no answer for that. And the second was, how can you still respect rabbis after the pushback? So in regards to respecting rabbis after the pushback.
Wait, I didn't understand what you meant by the kippa's in your head, honestly. Can you just explain? You're saying you just don't have a kippah on your head, but you think Jewish? I
was just saying that it's not on the head, but I believe strongly. That's all I was saying.
Okay.
It's not a specific lesson, but it's something. The Jewish pride is definitely there. It's something that comes out very, very easily and very quickly. In recovery meetings, I don't think I've ever come with a yarmulke, and I'm known as a Jewish guy. So I don't know why, I don't know how, but that's what happens. And when I'm not there and a new Jewish kid comes in with the full beard and everything else, say, oh, there's this Jewish kid you got to meet. So that's whatever it is. So I'm very comfortable with that. I embrace it. I have tons and tons of Jewish pride, and it happens not to be on my head. I wasn't saying anything, and I wasn't making any judgment for anyone who does have it. Mike asked, how can I still respect rabbis after the pushback? I don't know what rabbis means. Like a specific rabbi, how can I respect them? Maybe I can lose respect for a specific rabbi if I feel like they're being totally disingenuous with their pushback or they have ulterior motives. But I don't have to put a blanket in rabbis. I have, rabbis that I love and have a lot of respect for. So there's no blanket rabbis. And just because someone has a title rabbi, I don't expect them to act perfectly always. There are definitely certain people who push back in ways where it was clear that there was no real attempt at a search for the truth or helping people, and it was motivated by their own ill intentions. So those specific people lost my respect. Rabbis as a class have not lost my respect.
Well said.
Someone said, are you in my brain? No, that's a kippah. That's a kippah in your brain.
Okay. Oh, okay. We ran out of the questions. Does that mean I get to go back to all the questions I've been adding up on my notes? Anyone else have any questions?
Hi, Tila.
What's that?
Someone said hi. My niece said hi, so I said hi, Tila.
Oh, hold on one second. Let me see if I if my questions were addressed from what I was hearing from you. In the meantime, if anyone has anything they wanted to ask.
In your experience, what's the main reason people don't go to therapy or are afraid to go? I've heard different things. I think for a lot it's judgment. What are others going to think of them? You know, I think for others, a lot of people don't want to heal. I mean, a lot of people aren't ready to heal, and there's a certain benefit they get from staying where they are, and there's no judgment to it. If someone is in that place and they have no interest in healing, they're getting enough from whatever it is that it's doing for them, then by all means, don't heal. I mean, it's not for everyone.
Well, could I comment on that also? Sometimes people might want to heal, but not know where to find the resources or how or who to talk to or where to even start. So then it's easier not to heal.
Oh, this is a good one. In terms of if they totally don't know, people, like, what's the main reason? There is a lot of judgment. There is a lot of unknown. What is it? What are they going to ask me to do? What are they going to tell me to do? Do crazy people go to therapy? So there's a lot of unknown around it, and certainly unknown scares people. So I wasn't referring to that. I was referring more to someone who has information around it and still doesn't jump in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Because I feel like we're from where I see things, and some of the feedback that I hear, a lot of people sometimes like know they have something going on and wish they could do something about it, and they do want to do something about it. But a lot of times it sometimes does come down to, you know, the people in their life are not validating what they're feeling, or I mean, this might not relate to you, but it does relate to a lot of our followers who have made comments, and or, you know, they want to reach out, but they've just never like knew where to go or didn't trust that they could find the right place, you know, things like that, or just didn't feel that in the Jewish world there was the right access that's out there, or nothing that's good enough, or things like that. That's some of the feedback that I've heard.
Certainly. I mean, and that's why we keep talking, and hopefully someone shares stories. I'm sure by me sharing my story and going to therapy, it's like looking at it where I am now. I mean, isn't that kind of the purpose, that we're supposed to have stuff to work on? And does anyone get out of childhood completely unscathed, that we have nothing to do, no work? So, and it's not even like unhealthy. I don't even take it from that perspective. There's just a journey of constant development, that we want to get better and we want to fine tune things. And there's no parents in the world, I mean, good parents or the best parents, can't give every child everything they need. And that's adulthood, is getting what we need to get. So therapy has a lot of negative connotations, and I wish it didn't. Most people, it certainly doesn't for me. And it's something that I think in my own way, people who are close to me know that, and hopefully they're a little more comfortable with it. And I think the more and more people who share that and share the benefits they've got from the work and the journey that they've taken, hopefully more and more people are willing to jump in also.
Yeah, I mean, I know from just hearing you speak, I already feel like it just, things just seem to make sense, you know, like if you're confident in your life and you're confident in your story, then there just shouldn't be a reason that you can't help other people with that. I mean, in whatever way that is. And especially, I think a lot of it sometimes can come from a fear of what we've been discussing, like just a fear of judgment, and a fear that, you know, if I say this, like, maybe no one will relate. But the fact is, and I think we're clear on it, and everyone who's on here is clear about it, that, you know, everyone can relate to something, that, you know, no one's life is perfect, and we're all struggling. No one ever claimed that life was easy. And
those things that we're most ashamed of, that's where we're most human. And where we're most human is we're most like others. So it's those things specifically that when we share, we always get, you're speaking my thoughts, you're speaking my mind.
It's just hard to be that person to do it. I mean, it takes the confidence.
I don't know that it takes the confidence. It takes doing it. I also got specific advice from others that this was good for me, so I did it. So sometimes it doesn't take, you know, I have a really close friend who went to work, moved to Israel, was working for a company there, and his boss had told him when he started working that I'm going to sell the company to you within 12 to 24 months. And it was 3 years later, and he still hadn't done it. And I said, are you going to ask your boss about it? And he said, no, I just don't feel it. And I said, since when is feeling comfortable a prerequisite for doing something? Why is that? Why is that one of them? You're never going, this is always going to be a scary, uncomfortable conversation. Just suck it up. You can even tell the guy, I'm nervous doing this, and just get out what you need to get out. But this other idea that there's a certain feeling of comfort. I never give a speech and get up. When I got on this, I was a little bit uncomfortable right at the beginning, but now I just know that I talk, and 10, 15 seconds later, it just becomes normal. And the same with a lot of stuff.
I love that. I really love that. And to me, I mean, the truth is I probably would have never had a reason to say this, but for me personally, I hate talking on these things. And I don't even like being on Instagram in the first place, but I every time I make a story, it's usually for a reason that there's something that I think other people should hear. And I'm not confident about making the story on the Instagram, but I do it because you're right. It's not the confidence. It's the passion, I think. And
it's the purpose. It's a passion. That's all. If it feels like it's doing something, then we do it.
Yeah.
There's a judgment. I'm sure there's judgment. I'm sure people ask, what the hell am I doing? Sure. What do I care? The bottom line is that I used to have tons of anxiety. I used to have tremendous sadness. I used to feel very insecure, and now I don't. So if it's doing it and I'm working it, I saw a meme today. It said if it turns the sides of your lips upwards or the sides of your mouth upwards, keep doing it. Listen to that.
Oh, so I'm trying to figure out what that looks like. It's just a smile.
yeah, just a smile, right? If it's giving you a smile, if it's making you feel better, do it. I used to have panic attacks. I don't have panic attacks anymore. I used to have a lot of anxiety. I used to wake up in the middle of the night, sometimes crying. I don't anymore. I feel really good, so I just keep doing it.
And if you don't figure out what that is, you keep trying. Let's see. People are afraid. I don't know. I don't remember what we were up to. Do you know?
There was that. People are afraid of the work and undoing everything they've been covering, neglecting for so long. Some yes, some no. People are making comments, so I don't have any specific.
Here, I'm gonna look at the comments. People are afraid of the work. Okay. Yeah, it's a process, and start sometimes by jumping into therapy or by jumping into your wounds. You have to open something up a little wider than you would have liked to in order to seal it up. I'm just looking at more comments. Put it on the back burner, doubting the effectiveness. Yeah, I hear that too. I mean, of the right therapy or therapist. I actually would love to speak to that one from the Kosher Contessa. I hear that one. I think sometimes, especially if you're, you're a person who's used to trusting yourself and trusting your gut, sometimes it's hard to know, and someone who likes to be effective with their time, sometimes it's hard to know what's worth it and how much effort you should put into finding the right therapist. But actually, I was having this conversation with someone recently that, most people who go into therapy, and that's not all, I can't speak for all, but most people who go into therapy went in it to do good for the world and, have some kind of, they learned the skills, they went to school, and they're ready to, they have something to share. And maybe their personality might not click with you, but it's always good to just jump in and start with someone, just to at least exactly what Ellie was saying before, like you just do it and then afterwards deal with the problems that it causes for you after. And most likely it doesn't cause more problems. It might actually help. But
yeah, I do want to calibrate some of what I'm saying so it's not misunderstood. I don't mean to walk into a therapist's office and give them carte blanche on whatever they say. That's what I'm going to go ahead and do. That's not at all what I mean. So whenever I've had good results in therapy, is I set the goal in therapy. If I'm not setting the goal, I don't want to be there. So the goal is I want to be in a relationship. I don't want the therapist to tell me that I think it's good enough. It's good for you to be in a relationship. My therapist for a number of years told me he asked me, are you ready to address this problem I had with porn. I didn't see it as a problem with porn. And I said no, and I wasn't ready to deal with it then. So I'm talking about walking in and saying, this is what I want to work on. So when I first walked the first time, I said, I want to understand why I allow people to take advantage of me. And that's what I was ready to work on. And then the advice that was in line with those things, that's what I listened to. I'm not saying, definitely not saying to give a therapist carte blanche. I think that a lot of people end up in problems with therapists in that way when they let the therapist control their whole life and they get into very unhealthy relationships with their therapist. I also don't think therapy is a very long-term thing. I think it should be focused and very goal-oriented. What is the goal? Why am I there? What's the result I'm trying to get? And go from there. But within that specific, once they understand that within this specific niche, this specific question, this therapist or this person I'm speaking to, recovery or something else, has this expertise, whether it's business or otherwise, then it's prudent to take that person's advice. But for them to set the goal, that's never my recommendation.
I think that's a really good point that he said, and it's something that I actually really believe in everything in life, business, everything. Like whenever you're meeting with someone, whoever it is, you should always take the lead. I mean, whatever, it depends on the context, but you should always know what you're going into discussing. You should always have your goals and your agenda for that conversation. And the same way in business, you don't go into a meeting without an agenda. With a therapist, you don't go into a meeting without thinking what you want to talk about beforehand. You can't let the therapist run it because, I mean, I don't know. This is just my own self speaking. So everybody has their own, but I don't know. I guess I'm kind of getting carried away in my thoughts, but yeah. Whatever, I'll stop there. Anyway, but the point is that what he said was a really good point, that you can't just take someone's word just because they went to school. You also have to work hard to figure things out yourself. They're just there to guide you in your own thoughts. So remember that when you're picking a therapist that might fit.
And someone over here said most people don't walk into a therapist's office with goals and checklists. I think that's why someone walks into a therapist's office with some specific thing that's bugging them. I think what happens sometimes, so for example, if they're broken and rock bottom in their life, say, this is the way I feel and I don't want to feel like this anymore. And that's where it is. What often happens is 9 months later, the person's feeling better and then the therapist says, oh, by the way, here's another thing that I think is worth dealing with and maybe you should pay attention to this or pay attention to that. And the person often isn't ready or doesn't want to and then ends up down a path that they don't want to go. That's what I'm referring to. But I think someone walks into a therapist's office with a very specific reason. I have a relationship that's broken. I have a habit that's kicking my ass. I have a feeling that I don't like. It's a very specific goal.
And even if it's not like, oh, let me write down my goals, let me make a checklist and make sure after I went to the therapist that I checked off all the boxes. It doesn't need to look like that. But a lot of times in the therapy session itself, that the therapists are trained to guide your thoughts in that direction. As long as you bring them the point of why you're there, it doesn't really need... I made that a little intense. It doesn't really need to be like a checklist of everything you want covered. Usually, if it's the right therapist, it should be a structured conversation. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, another thing also is with this right therapist thing is my own experience. I see a lot of people worry about that. Is this the right person? Sometimes you're better off talking to a wall. I mean, it doesn't have to be, the therapist doesn't have to be the smartest person in the world, most brilliant person in the world. If they have experience in this specific thing that you're trying to get over, it's amazing the kind of people who have helped me get out of this situation. But if I'm trying to stop porn, I'm not looking for the smartest person in the world. I'm not looking even for someone who studied all the effects of porn. I'm often looking for someone who's either helped a lot of people to stop watching it, and I can prove that in some way, or they themselves have stopped it, then I ask them what they did. So it's not this whole, I know a lot of people want their therapist to be smarter than them. And for some people, that's impossible. You're just really smart. You're not going to find someone smarter than you. But you likely will find someone who's been able to work with and has experience working with that specific issue. I don't love giving advice and speaking too much to the standpoint of advice or not advice. So if there's questions like related to my personal experience, I love sharing my own personal journey and story. And if someone can relate to that, I'd be more than happy to.
Why don't you do you want to talk about any specific part of your own personal journey that you feel that you would want to kind of share in this platform that you think people could relate to or should hear? Is that you want to go into a little more detail? Maybe then people will have specific questions. Or, I mean,
part of my own journey?
What's that?
I don't know, did you have any specific questions? I'm trying,
So
tell me about
I
your
personally did not, but anyway, I guess we've been on here for an hour already. So if people don't have questions right now, that's totally fine. I would say maybe you could just kind of leave us with a final message from some of your main takeaways, I guess, from your own life, your own journey, your own struggles, and some things that, you know, you feel that people can learn from, you know, what you would tell yourself 5, 10 years ago, even 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I can tell you what I tell myself all the time. So the my main message and kind of that carries through everything is that negative doesn't really exist, right? So pain is not a negative. Pain is simply a communication device telling us to go somewhere. Even our past experiences, all of these things, I try to find meaning in the struggle. And I don't use the word find meaning in the struggle almost as sometimes create meaning in the struggle. So sometimes these things that are bugging me the most, I try to see how can I create meaning from that thing that's absolutely driving me crazy. For example, if someone were to lose a child and that's a horrible, horrible thing, there is no silver lining. It's not something that I'm going to find this meaning. How do I make sense of this? And maybe there's some sort of positive, and maybe I had a, you know, there were years that were amazing, and let me appreciate the years that were amazing, even for the devastation afterwards, all of that. That's a lot of silver lining stuff, and it's a lot of things that don't work for me. What I like is creating the meaning. So for example, if someone has gone through that experience, and how do they create that into something meaningful today so that they can look at something that's happening in the world and say, had this horrible experience not happened to me, had I not gone through this struggle and pain, this would never exist. So for example, a lot of the work I did with JCW and helping to create that, and at a point in time it closed down, I was creating the meaning in my struggle. For a long time, I had a lot of pain over the abuse I went through. And I had a lot of sadness for the boy who chose to go back to a home where I was being abused versus staying in my parents' home. And that, I had a lot of sadness for that person and a lot of pain that was inside. And by fighting for JCW and helping to create that platform and still seeing it today, helping people, I've created the meaning in my struggle. When I look back at those experiences, I say, if not for those experiences, this good would not exist in the world. And the same is true. One of the reasons I'm talking about porn addiction is because there was still residual shame around porn addiction for me. Is why of all addictions did I have this one? I got the point of addiction, and I had some benefit that I received from being in recovery. But I said, okay, so like, couldn't it have been alcohol or something? Like, couldn't have been something, I don't know, even gambling. And I'm not making light of those addictions, but there's a very large shame around porn addiction, and it's like a stigma. Right? Why do I have to feel like if I act out that my wife feels like I cheated on her? If I drink, she's not going to think I cheated on her, and that's not where I'm coming from if I end up acting out. So there was some residual shame surrounding this addiction, and I said, you know what, let me create the meaning in this struggle that I have. And how do I create the meaning? I talk about porn addiction. Last week I got a message from someone saying, I heard you talk about porn addiction, and I've been struggling with this. The guy has several kids. He's and it's kicking his ass, and everything bad that happens to him in his life, he decides it's Hashem punishing him for watching porn. And I had a really good conversation with him, and he said he's never felt so understood, and he's never felt so much hope, because I was speaking things, everything he was saying, I was there at one point in time. I told him, everything you're saying, like I can show you my journals from 6 years ago, they say these words. I promise you they say these words. The guilt, the belief that I'd never be able to get out of it, and there is a way out. And afterwards, just him sending me that message is all the meaning I need, and now I have no more residual shame around the porn addiction. It's amazing. And so I create the meaning in my struggle. I'm not saying this is the way for everyone, but this has been my journey, and it's but my leading thing through everything. When something negative happens, is how am I going to turn this into something, whether it's a foundation, a speech, or something that other people are going to benefit from. And what it ends up turning into is that if I was writing my book, I want to be like totally in sync with God, right? I want to be like totally okay with his story. So maybe that's the keep on the head. That if we were writing the story, like he wrote the story and everything that happened to me until now happened. But if I was writing the story, like I would put in all the chapters, all the happenings, all the experiences, just like he did, because I'm right there with him. And that's what I try to do, is line myself up. And what it does is gives me a lot of confidence about my ability to handle challenges in the future, saying, okay, most likely anything that happens to me, I'll be able to convert to something that I can find meaning. I don't want it, and I don't want to test myself in this regard, but if it's there, I'm fairly confident that this could be turned to something really, really positive in the world. That's all.
That's amazing. Wow. Thank you so much. I'm looking at the numbers of viewers, and I see we have 26 people who are on right now. And for all of you 26 people, you're so lucky that you got to hear this message. I feel so lucky that I got to hear this message. And if you guys can share this with anybody, because this is just like very powerful stuff that he's telling us. And it could literally relate to everybody who's going through anything, because everyone's going through something, whatever that is. So yeah, I mean, so thank you so much for coming on, and I thank you all for watching and listening and taking in what he has to say, because I think this is really good stuff.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to see a little closer, follow what we're doing at Mic Drop. Join it by all means. Share your own story. I've watched speeches which I myself were like, hey, that wasn't so good. I was like, all right, whatever. Raj, what happened there? And then afterwards, someone kind of said, you don't know what that speech did for me. And I only made that first comment to lead up to the second comment, but really, people say that it's like, holy crap, that was a really inspiring message. And for me, it didn't resonate with me because they weren't speaking my thoughts. But I know when I speak about porn addiction, I know when I speak about sexual abuse, I know when I speak about losing a lot of money, I know I'm speaking someone else's thoughts. So I speak about those things, and that's all. I hope people join the movement of Mic Drop. We got a workshop tomorrow night in Miami, specifically catered to those dealing with people related to addiction. So by all means, come on over, support the movement, share your own story, change the world.
Question, for people who aren't living in Miami, is there a way to get involved still?
Absolutely. We have a workshop in LA next week. We'll have workshops in New York. So there's always stuff going on. Someone said, can't wait to read your book. I guess I got to work on it at some point.
Okay. So, and anything online, or is it just like we wait till you come to each city?
We have our YouTube channel where there's a lot of talks which we share. We also have an online course, which is great. The online course is amazing. But really joining the workshops and taking the stage, and obviously everyone can always call and book a private session with us. And, you know, we had someone last week who made an event, a Mic Drop event, all for himself. Okay, someone made a Mic Drop event all for themselves. They had a traumatic brain injury as a child, and they wanted to share the story with their friends and families. They did that. So we're always available. We'll be as creative as you want us to be. Reach out, share your story, change the world. I'll keep saying that.
Amen. All right.
Thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for bringing this message out. Good night.
Of course. Have a good night. Thanks for joining, guys.